Welcome to 3D Movie Cinema, the only show that's 3 dimensions away from Scream being called Scary Movie. I'm your host 3D Jake, and today we're looking at Scream, released in 1996. Scream is directed by Wes Craven, is written by Kevin Williamson, and is produced by Catherine Conrad and Carrie Woods. And the movie stars David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, Skeet Ulrich, and Drew Barrymore. The movie is essentially a horror film about a woman that gets killed, a teenager that gets killed the night at night, and then of course the next day everybody at school is wondering, because she goes to high school, so everybody assumes it's someone from the high school that did it. And of course then the next day another girl gets attacked, and then of course they have a pattern that someone's just killing kids in high school. And so of course that person that survived the attack, she basically is being under police escort and everything, and they're trying to wonder who the killer is. Is it someone close to her? Or is it her dad? Is it her boyfriend? There's so many suspects, and we're trying to figure out the big bottom of who the one is behind the mask. I am a huge fan of this movie. This movie is so good, okay? I'm a big fan of Scream. I remember when I was a kid, I was just I remember seeing Scream 3 first. No, I think I saw Scream 2 first, then Scream 3, and then I saw Scary Movie, so I saw Scream 1 last. And I remember just being a huge Scream fan. I'm a huge Scream fan. And I loved Scream when I first saw it. I saw up to, I think, when I was a kid. It was around 2006 or so. I saw all the way up to the third act. And then I heard something in the noise, and I was so scared because I was a kid. And so I ran out of my house. And I told my mom, because my mom was right down the road. I'm like, oh, there's something in the house. And she comes, it's just papers flying from the air conditioner because they fell over. And so I didn't get to see the ending. All I saw was Courtney Cox doing a news report, and that was it. And I'm like, oh man, and I was just so bummed that I couldn't get to enjoy it. So it wasn't until years later, when I was like in 9th or 10th grade, that they actually had the whole movie. So I got to see it from like the beginning, and I watched the whole movie, and I was so impressed. And I really enjoyed the movie. And over the time, if it came on, I'd watch it. It wasn't until I had a VHS copy of Scream, like I saw at a flea market. It was like the day after my homecoming dance, and I'm like, oh, I saw a VHS copy of Scream 1 and Scream 2. And I begged my mother, I'm like, please, Mom, let me get this, please, please, please. And my mom bought it for me, and I was so grateful that I got to enjoy Scream 1 and 2. And I remember just watching it over and over and over. I'd come home from school and watch it over and over. And I'm like, this is so cool. I have one Scream 1. And then I remember my cousin I traded a video game for Scream 3. Like, I was that hardcore of a Scream fan. I remember I had The Simpsons Hit and Run, and I traded The Simpsons Hit and Run for Scream. I remember that. I did that for Scream 3. I traded The Simpsons Hit and Run for a VHS copy of Scream 3. And so I was a huge fan. And so, of course, what happened is, and then of course, even I was this hardcore of a fan, I even traded a mask, a Scream. I even traded a Star Wars, Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker, Lego Star Wars 2, the original trilogy, and an action figure of Cyclops for a Scream mask. And that's how hardcore I was. And so as a kid, you're like, I was a kid, of course. And nowadays I wouldn't do that. I was like, you can go buy one for $5 at the dollar store. But, and I was a big fan then. So, of course, I saw this movie, and I was a huge fan. I rewatched it over and over and over again. And so, and then I remember Scream 4. I literally begged my father to take me to see Scream 4, and I would watch the trailer over and over again. Had a VHS recorded the trailer, and I was so excited. And it wasn't until I got to see the movie, I was so over head over heels. And I even begged my mom to take me to Best Buy and buy it when it came out. I was in high school. And I said, hey, Mom, can you please take me to high school, like Best Buy, and let me buy the DVD for Scream 4 when it came out? And she did. And I was rewatching it over and over, and I was so excited. And now I own it on digital and Blu-ray and stuff. This movie, though, has always been near and dear to my heart, because I love that, like, the movie, not only does it I have great memories with it, I just remember watching it because it's like a murder mystery movie. It is like a whodunit. And this movie kind of saved the horror genre, because when this movie first came out back in 1996, by the way, this came out Christmas of 96. So, and this was made by Miramax, the Weinsteins, who, yeah, they're not great people, let's be honest, but but they did us a solid, and they made this movie Scream, which, a movie that a lot of people, nobody wanted to make this movie, okay? Because Kevin Williamson, who was a horror writer, who was a gay man who was house sitting, and then of course he was eating popcorn, watching like a murder mystery thing, and then I guess he flipped the channel and watched like some news story about a guy who's breaking into people's houses and murdering them. And then that kind of spooked him. And then he saw a window was left open, and he was like, "Oh my God, is someone here?" And so he called his friend, and he went and grabbed a knife, and he was on the phone. And then of course he just remembered this would be a good idea for a horror film. So then he went and he wrote a script, a spec script called Scary Movie. And then of course it got in rotation, and then eventually got bought and made into a film. Which the Weinsteins, when they got the script, they were like, okay, we want to make this, but here's the thing: we want to have a horror name attached. And the first person went to Wes Craven, and Wes Craven turned it down by saying, I don't want to make this movie. He said that I've just been doing Nightmare on Elm Street movies and horror films all my life. I want to do something different. So of course he turned it down. Then they went to other people, although they did keep the door open, saying in case he wanted to, and they offered it to Robert Rodriguez and different people. But of course, they all saw it as a parody. They didn't see it as a true horror film. And it wasn't until Wes Craven, when he made the movie, like he was at a convention signing Nightmare on Elm Street merchandise, and then they were like, teenager comes and goes, "Hey, when are you going to make another kick-ass movie again? Your movies have been sucking lately." I'm paraphrasing, of course. And then, of course, that hit Wes Craven so hard that he was like, oh my God, my movies suck. Like a kid is coming up, a teenager came up and suck. So that's when Wes Craven finally changed his tune, and he said, hey, look, Bob Weinstein goes, hey, look, if that job is still open, I would like to take it. And of course that became, and then The Mask they were scouting for location, him and his producer. And his producer saw, like, they were looking, because they were drawing different masks, and they saw this mask, and they took a picture, and they were like, he said, we need to get the rights to that mask, because that's the mask that we want. And then, of course, they're like, we don't have the rights to that. So then they made KMB, and so they were like, they're about to begin shooting. And then they were like, oh, they said they shot with, like, the KMB mask, made a similar mask that they can get away with. That's actually the mask in the opening scene. But then the Weinsteins were like, why don't you do a couple different reshoots? And then he goes, no. He goes, I want to do it with that mask. So, of course, they made a deal, and they got the rights to the mask, and then they shot the movie with the mask, and it became the most popular Halloween item next year, and people were so obsessed with Scream. It's like, and then, of course, Drew Barrymore, they offered the lead to Sydney, and she said no, she didn't want to play Sydney. She wanted to play Casey Becker. And they're like, the opening kill? No, that's stupid. And he goes, no, I want to be the opening kill. It'll subvert expectations. People are like, oh my God, Drew Barrymore's in this horror film, and then I die. She'd be so clever. So they did that, and they kept her on all the posters, and she's in all the posters and everything. There's even a VHS cover that has a kid of her covering her mouth. It's of Drew Barrymore, and that because they were expecting, and they kept her in the trailers and never killed her, because they wanted to subvert your expectations of this movie. So I remember watching this movie, and one thing is, like, and you see Drew Barrymore get murdered the first 10 minutes, and you're like, oh my God, if she got killed, then there's like, no one's safe in this movie. And, and a lot of people, like David Arquette was offered one of the teenager roles, and he wanted to play Dewey, and they're like, he's like a 40-year-old man. He goes, it can work. And of course it worked out, because him and Courtney Cox got married after this movie, and they fell in love in real life. And Wes Craven, and I think one thing I like about this movie is the killer is in your face the whole movie. Like, they say, like, oh, it's the boyfriend, and most horror films, you would say it's the red herring, it's not the boyfriend, it is the whole movie, and they keep it in your face the whole movie, and you're just like, there's no way. And then you even see him get killed at one point in the movie, and you're just like, oh my God, it's not the boyfriend. Oh my God, we were so wrong. And then you find out, it is the boyfriend the whole time, because it's just, there's two people that are in. And because you're like, oh, it's only, if it's the killer, it's got to be one person. And it turns out when it's two people, it's Stu and Billy. They were working together, and it explains everything now, because it's like, when Billy's in prison, the killer, he gets Stu to call, and he calls to Sydney to mess with her. And then you have, of course, Billy, like, and then of course when Billy gets stabbed, it's Stu stabbing him. And then of course, and I even like watching YouTube breakdowns. Like, there's a guy named Zach Cherry who does Who Killed Who, where he breaks down like how Billy and Stu were able to coordinate their kills, or how Billy was able to go outside. Because Billy wasn't just sitting up there waiting for Sydney to come back in the house. He was there coordinating. Like, he was in the costume sometimes. Stu was in. I thought that was some great breakdowns. And I think one thing I like about this is that it keeps you guessing this movie, because at one point you see, like, once you that horrific opening, you see like Sydney, and you're like, oh my God, she escapes it. And then you find out, like, all this reason, like, the motivation is just it's a simple motivation. Like, okay, your mother was fucking my father, and then my mom moved out and abandoned me, and that made me mad, and I killed your mother. and I frame somebody, put them in prison, and then now I'm trying to frame your dad and make it look like he's going to go off on a killing spree. It kills everybody except for me and Stu, and then everybody dies. That to me is, it's so realistic of an expectation that you feel like this movie does feel like this could be a real film. And I do think the one thing is, like, once, like, you know, once Sydney, I think, you know, once the Ghostface, it, like, once it builds up to the party, I feel like there is no, like, you know, there is not a lot of Ghostface afterwards. I feel like, you know, there's no kills really, and I understand the Weinsteins even told that's why they had the principal death, which I remember I was rewatching the movie, and like the scene where Henry gets scabbed to death, I'm like, he is so terrible at dying in that movie, where he's like, ah, ah, you know, and you're just like, what the hell? Like, I mean, come on, you know, ease it back some. Yeah, and I think that was one thing that kind of took me out of it, because it's like, so there was some campiness in the movie to where I know some people see it as a horror comedy, but I see it more as it's a horror film with comedic moments. Like, for instance, I think Jamie Lee Kennedy sometimes chews up the scenery some, where I think mostly, you know, it works. Like, some of the dialogue, you could even say it was a little cheesy, but it works at that time. Like, there's some stuff like where they're talking about, oh, this is just one big movie, you know, where there's a scene where, like, Randy's giving the rules out, which rules work, but then when he's talking about, you know, like, oh, you know, you can't have, you know, sex, that's great, but then, you know, when you're seeing, like, you know, there's different things when he's in the video store explaining, like, the whole very simple formula, and then Billy shows up and stuff. Like, there's stuff like that where you can be like, well, that's kind of stupid, or, you know, or I remember you could see when they're in the kitchen and Stu's acting all chewing up the scenery. You could say that's kind of stupid, but it worked. I think it works, but I can understand where people say it kind of loses you. This movie is a hard-felt horror gem that redefined the slasher genre, sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst. If I had to give this movie a grade, I'm going to give it a solid A+. Thank you so much.
Sharpton for president, y'all. I'm outie.
Jesse Jackson for VP.